Hello, everyone. This is Jose Palomino with another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Today's guest is Ross Youngs, and Ross is CEO of Univenture. He is a longtime entrepreneur, has successfully taken businesses from small investments to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And we're going to talk today about disruptive innovation and how that's not a game that's only for the very biggest companies like a Microsoft or an Apple, but is actually something you can actually follow a couple of key steps and start applying those principles to your business to create disruptive innovation in your category. So listen carefully as we welcome Ross Youngs to our show. Well, welcome, Ross, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Well, Ross, you've been an entrepreneur for a long time, and as listeners to our podcast know, we not only have specific domain experts on our show, but we also love to have business owners, entrepreneurs, people who've actually had to apply those principles to make stuff happen. So we're so glad you could be on with our listeners today. So to give us context, just maybe describe a little bit about what you do and who you do it for presently. And I know you've had a career as an entrepreneur, so you've done a few things. We'll get into that a little bit, but just right now, what's the happening project for Ross Youngs?
Well, there's two things. My core business, Univenture, is focused on making products for industry and consumers that they love and that are differentiated somehow, either better, faster, cheaper, or compete in a way that others can't compete in. So that's the differentiation that I strive in everything we create. And then my passion, my focus on the future is actually life science impacting. And it'll impact therapeutics, agrochemical, sustainability, longevity. And that is a way at getting at the hidden chemistry of life. We think we've got something that nobody ever thought possible, and it's incredibly exciting.
Wow. And what's the name of that
That is Biosortia, Biosortia.
Okay, Biosortia. All right, cool. And, I mean, that's just like, those are big ideas, right? So like sometimes, and it's perfectly fine if somebody says, my business is we make boxes. Great, because somebody needs boxes, right? But you're talking about stuff that's at next level. So let's take the first one, the kind of looking at creating products that are differentiated in categories. It sounds like categories that maybe they haven't seen a lot of differentiation typically. So how do you pick a product? Or how do you support a product category that you say that one is ripe for doing something different?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of inventors out there that think of things that are somehow going to impact the marketplace. I was lucky because one of the philosophies I took on was if I was going to start a business, I wanted to be in a growing industry that was just getting off the ground and had the opportunity to ride that wave as I created products and responded to customers. So if we go back to 1988, which was a heck of a long time ago, I came up with a differentiated way to hold compact disc that was more protection, 93% less plastics. That particular company was a platform, allowed me to create more than 600 SKUs in that particular market. And we created products that were sold not only through the entertainment industry, but the computer industry. And I virtually guarantee everybody listening to this podcast had gotten products in my packaging or my storage products over a period of years. We ended up hitting the Inc. 500 5 years in a row, grew dramatically, built that business, basically bootstrapped it, ended up in the first year and a half bringing in 4 outside investors for a total of $160,000, and then generated more than $430 million in sales.
Well, that's a good ROI if you're that investor. I mean, it would seem to be. And what's fascinating, because I remember being on a plane with like CD carriers, trying, shuffling them. And I was ecstatic when the iPod came out. Maybe you not so much at that moment in time, but still. But that's just talks about innovation, and you took one core idea, put your kind of boat in that river, and then you started seeing what else can you do in that river. It sounds like that's kind of the pattern, and it sounds like you're repeating that now.
I try to, and I'm definitely trying to do that. So I love platforms. I despise single products that have to rely on the success of that product. So we've created a number of platforms since then. I think one of the important things that strategically entrepreneurs or business people fail to remember, and that is that everything has a growth cycle, a cash cow, and then some kind of death. Um, Luckily, there are some businesses out there that have an extended cash cow. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality of it is you got to expect everything to become obsoleted by something in the future. A platform gives an extension. A platform allows you to meet other customers' needs and diverse customers' needs. So that's where we focused right from the beginning of this business.
Well, so let I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because I'm kind of curious, right? So the platform idea. So somebody listening says, "Listen, I'm a contract manufacturer, do about 10, 12 million dollars a year. My clients are people like, whether it's John Deere, Boeing, whatever we make stuff to spec. How do I love the idea of $160,000 turning into $430 million worth of sales. Maybe they're not thinking that's the possibility, but how do I do some of those principles of platform, extending leadership? How would I apply those principles in something as prosaic as, again, I'm just using the example, could be painting, industrial painting?
Yeah, I would reach out to my current team. I would reach out to customers. I would build a type of marketing opportunity to understand where the market is, where our production capability is, understand how we could go horizontally to meet our current customers, future customers, how we could go vertically to potentially create new offerings we could distribute straight to other customers. So I think there is a lot of value in focus. But I think one of the things that I see happening is a company finds a niche, builds around that niche, everything changes. They try to financially manage it rather than manage it through innovation. And I think that financial management is key. You better be driving sales, you better be driving profits.
Mm.
But ultimately, what really drives sales and profits is that next innovation, that opportunity to handle a downturn, that opportunity to find new markets. And a lot of the financial managers that are basically bottom line focused cut the easy stuff to cut, which is innovation, which is research, which is customer reach out and knowledge. That's the easy things to cut to drive profits, but that's a short term view. And what I see occurring not only in Fortune 500 companies, especially, but in even smaller companies, a lack of understanding what the future can bring because they're so incentivized for their self and their own performance. And to me, that's sad. When you're an entrepreneur like me who really controls the dynamic, I get to play in the future. And it's future that always drives higher ROIs.
Well, just one quick point on this point, and I want to move on to what you're doing that's going to in the life sciences arena. But what you said really resonates with me. I mean, as an observer, you look at Microsoft went through this trough, and they actually had the classic cash cow. They're still, getting all the benefits from Windows and Office, but they finally realized, oh boy, we have to make about 10 years ago, we have to do something else. And they came up with Azure and other platforms that actually now they're growing again, and they're actually a darling of Wall Street again, right? But it helps when you have 50, $60 billion of cash lying around that you have to figure out.
Precisely. But if you let the financial managers run it, they're not going to let you do that. So it takes tremendous discipline to say, and again, the investors want that money back too. It takes tremendous discipline to say, whoa, we've got a future here. We want to drive a future as well.
Right. So let's go back to that smaller business owner who's not Microsoft listening right now and saying, well, I'm not Microsoft. I don't have $60 billion in the basement, waiting to be used. I'm like making it happen quarter by quarter. How do I, because a lot of the literature and a lot of the thinking right now is always about hyper niche, get down to your super, super, super tiny target market as be the expert. Don't be the knee surgeon. Be the right knee surgeon. I mean, literally right as in right versus left. Um, I'm exaggerating just a little bit, but there's a lot. That's pretty much the dominant thought in marketing strategy. Like niche down as sharply as you can. Yet you're saying something a little contrarian to that. Maybe that's a place to anchor, but not to live.
It is, and it should be niche if you want to be successful. But why can't it be two niches? Why can't it be three niches? And in order to explore that possibility, you have got to at least take some risk in getting there. Stuff doesn't fall in your lap. And I like using a lot of examples. Let's pick the auto industry right now. When Elon Musk said we're going to build an electric vehicle that competes with the internal combustion engine, I guarantee you every automobile executive, every automobile engineer, and all of their investors said, yeah, sure you are. Now they're all looking at what he's doing. Disruption is a key thing, and it's really hard to figure out. And if you're not keeping your eyes on your customers, on your internal staffs and their ideas, and not trying to look for things, you're going to miss an opportunity that could double, triple, quadruple your business.
So, but the issue is risk, right? So prior to Tesla was Fiskar, and there were probably a few others that tried that made similar declarations, and they're nowhere to be found right now. So there's something to be said about execution, timing, but ultimately you do have to pull the trigger on something that isn't guaranteed. Like you have to take a shot.
That's true. And I look at the pharmaceutical industry itself, which has done this for decades now. Well, what do they cut so they can keep their investors happy? They cut their research. That's their future. They've got short timelines to enjoy a patent, and their patents take a long time to hit the market. They should be research intensive. Where they failed is in the execution of research. That's where they failed. They didn't fail in spending money in research, but you see their research dollars basically being cut in half over that same period. Now, is that excusable? Well, if I was in the market, I would give them very low PE ratios. And guess what? They do have generally, other than the ones that are showing new products based on, quite frankly, what's gone on in COVID, and also getting a ton of money from governments around the world because of COVID. But you look at the technology industry, people expect that the innovation is going to pay off. So their multiples are much, much higher. I would challenge any small business, private industry to say, how much are we putting into our future? Are we putting enough? And are we managing that appropriately? And by actually getting results somehow, some way. And a result could be as simple as understanding your future customer needs in a way you have no idea what that means today.
Right. And a lot of small business owners, candidly, especially in B2B categories, aren't even asking those questions. They're not. They're living in the very present, and they're concerned. They're like, okay, what's going to happen? Like in the current economy, what's going to happen? Are we going to be shut down again? Those kind of thoughts are what dominate. But it all precedes the pandemic too. This was a behavior or a way of thinking, living in the now only, and you do have to make investments. I love what you're saying here, Ross. It's very useful, and those investments doesn't mean necessarily everything's a bet your company investment. It could be like, well, lean into it, like ask some questions that you haven't been asking for the last 8 years.
Yeah. And one of the ways to do that, because small companies do have a lack of resources, but you'd be surprised at how many innovators would actually be interested in being on a board of advisors of a particular company. So you may have friends, you may have acquaintances in businesses, you may have peers that are in other industries. There is always the opportunity. There's professors, there's educators. There's always the opportunity to build a small board and challenge them with questions that help you drive your business forward.
Wow, and that's a relatively low cost, low time investment. That's just like, do you want to do it or don't you kind of issue.
Right. Yeah. And it's true. I've been involved in peer groups, CEO peer groups now, I think for 22, 23 years. And I see a lot of my peers in those peer groups that are like heads down on them personally, not on where is their business going? How do they build future opportunities? And recently, because of COVID, I've seen some of them who could have changed their own dynamic of the future years ago by maybe not buying the private plane, not buying the 3 vacation houses, where they could have invested a little now. Now they're going, oh my goodness, I've lost 60% of my business. What am I going to do? Well, you're going to have to sell your plane. You may have to sell some of your houses, and you may have to do what you should have been doing all along.
Right. So delayed investment doesn't mean that you don't get to do that investment, don't have to do it, because, and you think about just the last 20 years, how many, the recession and, the different cycles that have taken place. I mean, I lived in New York during 9/11. So you have 9/11, then there's a mini recession there, and then the 2006 recession. And, you go on, there's always these things. So stuff happens. It's always going to happen. You always have to be thinking about the future. So let's shift our attention to the future as you described at the outset of this interview, Ross, what you're most excited about. It sounded like world-changing stuff. So I'd like you to just expand on that a little bit for our listeners, because it sounded really interesting.
No, I appreciate that. And it's complex. And I'm going to try to put it in as much clarity as possible. And you'll have to tell me, do you get it or not?
All right.
But essentially, there was a golden age of pharmaceuticals back in the 50s and 60s. What made that a golden age is they grew microorganisms to see the chemistry within microorganisms. You have to grow enough of something in order to understand that chemistry that's in there. Think about plants. You can grind up plants, and maybe you'll find a valuable chemistry that you can use as a therapeutic or an agrochemical product or a cosmetic. Same thing was happening with microbes. Now, why is that important? Believe it or not, less than 1% of the microbes on the planet can be grown in culture or scaled up so you have enough of it to explore. So what happened? They kept running into the same thing because less than 1% of the microbes could do that. Now, everything changed. So that was a direct approach. They started to shift to indirect approaches. Indirect approaches like, let's use a massive chemistry kit to figure it out. That type of approach lasted for more than 40 years, billions of dollars a year worldwide. It was called combinatorial chemistry. Anybody can go to Wikipedia and look up combinatorial chemistry. It led to one drug on the shelf. Now put that in contrast to growing microbes, that 1%, that's led to more than 50% directly, indirectly, or inspirationally of all drugs on the shelf. So that was highly productive. Indirect approaches started to show they failed. What are the other indirect approaches everyone's using? Where is hundreds of billions of dollars going to today? It's going to genomics. It's going to metagenomics. It's going into computational biology, synthetic biology, and it's going into AI. Is that going to deliver? Well, if you really look at the experts and the scientific papers, there's so much missing key data points that is somewhat of a pipe dream. But since everyone has been trained to do that over the last 20 years, if you train people to do something, what are they going to do?
They'll do more of that.
They're going to do more of that. So what's our disruption? Well, there were key difficulties in getting at microbes without culturing. One, they're very fragile. Two, they change their metabolic pathways in as little as 15 minutes. So if you grab a microbe from somewhere, it may not really tell you anything. Our technology that was initially funded, we created it, but it got support by the Advanced Research Products Administration of the DOE, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Products and then also the U.S. Air Force Research Lab, originally all for biofuels, bioproducts. We pivoted it to discovery when we learned what we really had. And that was, we have the capability to go to the natural world with our unique technologies and acquire microbes at the kind of scale, at the kind of quality, and the kind of speed that is like a snapshot of the natural world. Nobody has ever been trained to do it. Nobody has ever executed that. No academic or industrial company is researching that. Biosortia invented that. It's a disruption. And like all disruptions, it now takes time and dollars to get to that next phase. As we get to that next phase, we believe we'll be creating hundreds of patents annually moving forward. We believe will impact not only therapeutics, but agrochemical, sustainability, cosmetics, industrial chemical, longevity. These are the secrets of life that we're going to be able to uncover. And 10 years from now, there will not be an academic research institution that isn't pursuing what we describe as microbiome mining, not only for the genomics, but for the actual chemistry and the activity of that chemistry. It will also lead to a wealth of opportunities to understand the human and use that to, let's say, analyze chemistry and understand and predict what's going on with inside a human, along with the genes alone. But I'll give you an example that's really clear. Your genes, my genes are completely different. Your microbiome, which has way more genomics than your own human genome, it's 23,000 of the human genome. It's more than 7 million genes in the microbes that live inside of you. Those microbes outnumber your human cells 40 trillion to 30 trillion. And they produce the vast majority of the chemistry circulating in your body, turning things on, off, up, or down, causing inflammation, removing inflammation, potentially neuro-CNS diseases, obviously infectious diseases. This is the absolute key to life. And it's been somewhat ignored because science did not have direct, meaningful access. Biosortia is game-changing that.
Wow. So obviously that's a deep game and a long game, right? That you have to be committed to. So that's
right.
Right. And
especially when it's disruption, because disruption is not easily seen. I gave the example of Tesla, but a lot of people forget 11 and a half years ago, Steve Jobs held up the iPhone and said, here's our entry into the cellular phone market. I guarantee you, Motorola, BlackBerry, Ericsson, Nokia, they were laughing. And so were their investors. They weren't scared. It didn't have a way to protect the screen, and it had no keyboard. This was a non-starter. Disruption is hard to envision for those entrenched.
Wow. Wow. Well, Ross, that is inspirational. Certainly, we wish you the very best on that as you roll that out, because I think your success with this sounds like it's going to have positive impacts on many aspects of life. So
we believe it will, and a lot of the scientists that work with us, universities all over the world, think so as well. But you still have to influence those with the pocketbooks.
Right. So something we talk about when we do work around value propositions is indispensability of a new idea. In other words, what is its usefulness over time divided by the cost of transitioning to that thing, right? So that's always the hard thing. It's like there's an inflection point where they say, okay, this is worth the change. And people do look at it that way. I mean, you look at everything from ERP systems to CRMs. They made sense for a long time until it reached a point where people say, okay, that makes sense financially at some level to make the transition. So I don't know what those particular hurdles will be for your technology, but I'm sure as you work through it, and it sounds like you've had so much experience doing this, I have every confidence you will figure this out.
Well, and you may have some advice, but I'll tell you what we've learned. We've learned that the venture capital investors and the pharma investors into new products do it in a focused, de-risk environment.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want to put any money into something until, and they do this mostly molecule by molecule. They don't want to put money into it until it's been de-risked. That means it's moved through preclinical and potentially starts to move into development, which is where it starts to go into a patient. Now, with that kind of philosophy, it leaves all emerging technologies uninvested because they're so focused on buying de-risk products because they tried to do the research and it didn't work out for the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. Well, Ross, we are out of time. This is fascinating. We could keep going with it. But if somebody listening said, this is interesting, I'd like to learn more about Ross and his work, where should they go?
Right now, univenture.com. So univenture.com. That's a nice page to land, learn more about the kind of things we're doing, including biosorption. And we have contact forms where anybody can put something in a contact form and say, hey, I want to talk to Ross. And they'll get to me.
Fantastic, Ross. Thank you so much for adding. I mean, really a fascinating set of explorations we had just on this interview. So thank you for that. I'm sure our listeners appreciate it. And we certainly wish you the very best as you move forward into your next stages.
Terrific. And you know what, since it's always changing, feel free to invite me back sometime in the future. And let's see if we can explore some things even deeper.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ross.
Take care.